Wednesday before the holiday and midnight or later partying here for this fiesta
that we share with you today. Please understand that this is very early in a complex and ongoing investigation, so there are some things that we simply cannot talk about for various reasons. There were some questions that I was asked earlier this morning when we did our initial briefing on scene. I wanted to provide some of that information to you guys now. The initial call for service, which is what we define as when a citizen calls in to the communication center at the Colorado Springs Police Department, was received at 11:56 and 57 seconds p.m. last night. The initial officer was dispatched at 11:57 p.m. The first officer arrived in the area at 12 a.m. and the suspect was detained and subsequently taken into custody at 12:02 a.m. Please understand that all of the numbers that we are providing are preliminary. They are changing. We have had additional people drive themselves to the hospital. So everything that we're giving you is the information we have at this moment to the best of our knowledge, but it is subject to change. If you were not at the initial briefing, the numbers will be shared with you again today. With that, I will have Colorado Springs Police Department Chief Adrian Vasquez.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here on this tragic day. I want to first express my condolences to those families who have lost the loved ones during this tragic event, and to those that were injured today during this tragic shooting. I want every citizen in our city to know that the men and women of the Colorado Springs Police Department stand with you during this tragedy. We are working tirelessly to ensure that justice for the victims in this senseless and evil shooting is given. Club Q is a safe haven for our LGBTQ citizens. Every citizen has the right to feel safe and secure in our city, to go about our beautiful city without fear of being harmed or treated poorly. I'm so terribly saddened and heartbroken. I also want to thank all of our first responders, our fire department, our police officers, sheriff's office, all of our medical personnel, whether they be transporting through AMR and other ambulance services, and all of our hospitals did a tremendous job during this undertaking. Thank you so much for all that you do every day. We are actively processing the scene at Club Q. Initial evidence and interviews indicate that the suspect entered Club Q and immediately began shooting at people inside as he moved further into the club. While the suspect was inside of the club, at least two heroic people inside the club confronted and fought with the suspect and were able to stop the suspect from continuing to kill and harm others. We owe them a great debt of thanks. As the investigation is still in its early stages, we are not going to identify any of the witnesses inside of the club at this time. The FBI is already on scene and assisting with the investigation. We are also working to identify the victims who have died and notify their families. Please be patient with the identification of the victims, as a first priority is to the victims' families. We have numerous detectives and officers interviewing witnesses and victims. We have multiple victim advocates also meeting with the victims who have been injured. These advocates will also be meeting with the families of those victims who have died. The suspect has been identified as Anderson Lee Aldrich, a 22-year-old male. At least 2 firearms were found at the scene. We are still working to identify the firearms and who they belong to, but I can confirm that the suspect used a long rifle during the shooting. Detectives are currently seeking multiple search warrants, so please be patient with the release of information, as this is a large and complex scene and will be time-consuming to process. Detectives are also looking to identify if there were any other individuals who assisted the suspect. The motive of the crime is part of the investigation, and whether this was a hate crime is part of that investigation. Again, my deepest condolences to the victims and to their families. And with that, I'd like to introduce Mayor John Suthers.
Thank you, Chief. Colorado Springs is once again in mourning after the tragic shooting at Club Q last night. Our hearts go out to the victims and their families who are bearing the weight of this horrific tragedy. As indicated, there is much we are still waiting to learn about this tragic incident. We know one or more patrons heroically intervened to subdue the suspect, and we praise those individuals who did so because their actions clearly saved lives. We also thank our first responders from across the Pikes Peak region who quickly responded to help those in need. The first officer arrived on scene within 3 minutes after being dispatched, and the suspect was subdued within 2 minutes after that. Victims were rapidly transported and received emergency attention as quickly as possible. We are a strong community that has shown resilience in the face of hate and violence in the past, and we will do so again. As a community, we will provide for the victims and witnesses of this horrific event, and law enforcement will pursue this case with the zealousness that it deserves. We will continue to share more information with the community as it becomes available. But please be patient. This is a horrible crime, and we have a suspect in custody. We must do this right and ensure justice is served for the victims of this tragedy. The Governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, has been in communication with me. We talked early this morning. Because he is in COVID quarantine, he is not able to be here personally at this press conference, but he sends his heartfelt condolences to the victims of this tragedy. I've also been in communication with Senator Michael Bennet, Senator John Hickenlooper. I'm also pleased that Councilwoman Nancy Hingham has joined us this morning. This is a community tragedy, and our community will respond appropriately. It's my pleasure now to introduce Michael Allen, the District Attorney of the 4th Judicial District. Michael?
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, so that was the police chief and also the mayor of Springs with an update on what we know so far about this very horrific moment at the Q nightclub in Colorado Springs. Once again, 5 people killed, 18 injured. We do know the suspect's name, now identified as 22-year-old Anderson Lee Aldridge. We'll have more details on this story certainly throughout the morning. Michelle's continuing to follow this story. I'll have an update for you at 7:30. We'll be right back right after the break.